Hello, and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I'm Rose Lucibello, Manager of Advancement Events at York. Thank you for joining us today's session, Halloween's Complex History. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm on. Because we may not be gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory you are on. Please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on. The website nativeland.ca is a good resource for this. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, we would like to conduct a quick poll before each session begins. The question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? The poll should pop up on your screen right now, and I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Thank you. It's helpful for our speakers to know more about who is in our audience. If you need help with Zoom webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is ready to help you. That same button may be used to submit questions for our guest speaker at any time. Please note that all of your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scenes, so we ask that you keep your comments relevant and respectful. Now, I would like to introduce Professor Rogers. Nicholas Rogers is the author of 11 books, most on 18th century Britain and the Atlantic world. He has written on popular protests, crime, sailors, and more recently on the 18th century Caribbean and the slave trade. We are so pleased that you can make the time to join us today. Please welcome Professor Rogers. Professor, there you go. Thank you so much, and please share your screen, and I will be back after your presentation to do a Q&A with you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. I'm going to talk about Halloween. I wrote a book on Halloween in 2002. It was a kind of jeu d'esprit, really, something of an outlier, really, for me. And perhaps later on I'll explain why I did it. But the first thing I'd like to do is to give you a discussion of the origins of Halloween, and which are really quite complex, and then take you very rapidly through to the Halloween of today. So, Jenny, could I have the first screen, the first slide? It's not coming up. Okay, here we go. The first one, the second one, sorry, the next one. Good, thank you. Okay, so there are there's a dispute about the origins of Halloween. A lot of people think it comes from a Celtic festival pronounced Samhain, which means summer's end. One of the reasons for this is that that is the name of the festival that's often used in Ireland, and is mentioned, in fact, in the Irish Folklore Commission of 1941 in places like Limerick and Donegal. Samhain was a festival that marked the beginning of the summer and the beginning of the winter for communities that were really rather peripheral pastoral communities, or perhaps had a little arable land and were very concerned about winter. And it was about stock taking, bringing in the crops, perhaps culling a few animals and salting them for the long winter, and warriors would come in from outside into the stockades for the winter. There would be a sort of succession of warfare during the period of winter. In an age when the supernatural and the natural were sort of entangled and almost entwined, it was thought actually that Samhain was a time when the supernatural emerged from the countryside, despoiled the crops. They had a sense of fairies or imps despoiling the crops. And so it was a time when, in many ways, the boundaries between the supernatural and the natural were sort of erased. And the holiday had a lot of supernatural intensity. One of the reasons why it's remained such an issue is because some people have appropriated it favorably, particularly New Style pagans, and unfavorably by the Christian right, who want to suggest that Halloween is somehow pagan, even satanic, and involved in rather grisly rituals of various kinds. The evidence about this is extremely slight and not very substantial, actually. The bad image of Samhain really comes from the Romans, from people like Strabo, Diodorus, who wanted to trash the Celts and said they were sort of barbaric cannibals. But there's no real evidence of sacrifice other than animals in the Irish sagas and things like this. So we're not really sure about this, but we certainly know that it's a kind of borderline festival between light and darkness, the darkness of winter, between growth and decay, and between and a period of sort of supernatural intensity. You'll see that actually, interestingly, that when I was thinking about doing the slides for this, the slide that came up was actually Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge has absolutely nothing to do with Samhain at all, as far as I can see. But in one of the Halloween films, Halloween 3, it was suggested that some of the chips from the blue stones of Stonehenge were used put in Halloween masks and would explode. So there's this sort of macabre appropriation of Samhain as a sort of grisly festival that has fed horror movies and the like. In many ways, I think that really Halloween comes from the Christian festival. After all, Halloween means the Eve of All Hallows, the Eve of All Saints, and from the 12th century onwards, it was the Christian commemoration of the dead. It was a time when people would toll bells, would hold graveside vigils, would say prayers for the recently departed. There was a feeling that prayers could be magical, that in many ways, if you could intercede with God and help people move from purgatory to salvation by praying. And it was customary for poor people in the neighborhood to go around to richer households and ask for victuals and ale in return for prayers. And this is called souling. And it was quite important. What was also interesting about the ceremonies of Hallowtide was that it was not only about death, it was also about the blessing of forthcoming marriages. There was in the liturgy a reference to the wise virgins awaiting the coming of the bridegroom, and boy choristers would actually hood themselves and as women. So you get certain features of Hallowtide that are important and of ritual significance to the modern Halloween. The threshold encounter, coming to the door, the asking for treats, if you like, and also masking and cross-dressing, which were really a very important part of early modern festivals anyway. Halloween, as such, took a bit of a beating during the Protestant Reformation. The Protestants weren't very keen on the notion of purgatory. They didn't think that you could pray and get people into salvation that way. And so it was actually banned. The holiday was actually banned in England. When I was a kid, I did not celebrate Halloween. I celebrated a day that commemorated the deliverance of Parliament from Catholics, which was gunpowder plot night, and or bonfire night, as it was usually called. But actually, Halloween survived in Celtic areas, in Ireland, in particular Catholic Ireland, in parts of England. There were residues of it in Catholic areas, and also in Scotland. Scotland's a bit of a mystery because in many ways, Scotland had a rather hard Protestant Reformation, and it's odd that it survived. But it did, I think, because it was important to commemorate the ending of the harvest and the renewal of agricultural leases in Scotland, and that's one reason why it survived. By the time we get to the 18th century, and if we can move on, Jenny, to the next slide. The next slide. Thanks. This is a slide of and you have on your picture there a print from an 1856 edition of Robbie Burns' Halloween, the poem Halloween, which was first made in 1786. The young man and girl are in actually 19th century dress, not 18th century dress in it. And it was a night when, as Robbie Burns explains in his poem, when witches, devils, and other mischief-making beings are all abroad. What's happened to Halloween by 1800, or near 1800, is that it's become a festival of supernatural eeriness and superstition, but the religion has gone. The religion has disappeared. There are all sorts of games that people play to foretell the future, and it was also a day when a sort of party night in a very rudimentary way, with a lot of coupling going on in the poem, and but also there are other participants. Grandmothers are mentioned, organizing some of the games. Young children are mentioned as well. One of the reasons Halloween then migrated basically to North America. It was part of the big Irish and Scottish migration of the late 18th and early 19th century. This, in many ways, the Irish and the Scottish were the predominant immigrants to North America before 1880, and so we get. It was regarded then very much as an ethnic festival. The glory, the New York Times, 1876, I quote, "The glory of this once popular festival has departed. Its triumphs and rough jollities are a matter of history." Well, not so. In actual fact, Halloween made a comeback. It made a sort of continental comeback in the last quarter of the 19th century. And we can see various forms of Halloween developing. If we move to the next slide, which is actually the first Canadian representation of Halloween that I found from the Canadian Illustrated News, this is very much a middle-class parlor rendition of Halloween. A lot of the people in the room are over the grate, and they are watching nuts being burnt in the grate. If the nuts remain together, it would foretell a happy marriage. If they split apart, a separation. The man and woman on the table at the back, she is actually dropping white egg into a bowl. If the white egg turns into a shroud, it predicts a forthcoming death in the family. You can see children um, apple bobbing, and you can see kids in the foreground who are eating sweets. And in fact, various sweets were part of the Halloween fair of this period, apples and nuts in particular, but quite varied actually. Some of the ads in, say, newspapers from Kingston, Ontario in the 1870s talk about oysters and grapes and other rather more exotic foods, exotic as they would have been in the 19th century. If we move to the next slide, we see a rather different Halloween. This is one from New York City, the New York Herald in 1907. This is the street Halloween. This is where the pranks take over, where the street kids rule, where there are different, a rougher Halloween, a Halloween of hilarity, but hilarity that borders on disorder in various ways, with young children trying to frighten an older woman, apple bobbing again, people running away with advertising plaques, and pelting people with sacks with holes in and pelting them with flour. I mean, that was something that went on in the streets and tripping up older people. These kinds of pranks were quite important, and one of the big problems of the era of the 20th century, right down until 1945, was trying to keep a hold on the disorder of Halloween. In Toronto, in particular, there was a near riot actually in 1945, in which a Halloween celebration in Queen Street East got out of control. Bonfires were built, gasoline was poured down the streetcar rails and set alight. Mounted police were called in to make some arrests. They arrested 3 people. They took them to Main Street Station. The station was then besieged by hundreds of people demanding that this was only Halloween hilarity. How dare they arrest these people? And eventually the demonstrators had to be dispersed by water cannon. And people thought, and the newspapers reacted with great hostility to this. They said, Halloween hilarity and some childish pranks are okay, but bad behavior by hoodlums, which is the word they use, is not okay. And so there were attempts in many ways then to try and domesticate Halloween, to try and bring it under stricter control and to try to regulate it. And that led to the trick or treat. The trick or treat. The trick or treat was not a term, if we can move, Jenny, to the next one, was not in fact a phrase that was used very much until the 1950s. It blossomed with the growth of suburbia. Kids would go around to houses and often in the early years with charity boxes. Here they have UNICEF. They would collect for charity and they would dress up. The costumes are predominantly, as you can see, homemade. And this was an attempt in many ways to tame Halloween in a little way, to render it a little bit more infantile and to keep it within respectable boundaries. That worked to a point. It came in for a few hard knocks because of tales in the press and then later on on television of Halloween sadism, razors in the apple, contaminated candies and so forth, which reached a peak, I think, in the 1980s with a few deaths, or rather a few serious deaths. And people were, in fact, getting wound up in many ways by Halloween. If this year's Halloween follows form, wrote Newsweek in 1975, a few children will return home with something more than a sick tummy. And I think for a while, and particularly after the Tylenol scare of 1982, Halloween trick-or-treating dropped off a little bit. The figures for 1985 suggest 60% of parents took their children trick-or-treating and only on a very restricted round. But Halloween in many ways became more commercial. It became more commercial because of another development that took place in the 1960s, if we move to the next slide, which was actually gay Halloween. Gay Halloween started in the 1960s. It was big time city Halloween. It was the first attempts by gay communities to possess some public space in a way. And since Halloween was in many ways a festival of transgression, this was quite successful. It happened there were big parades in Toronto along Charles Street. The bigger ones were in Philadelphia, San Francisco. There was a very even commercialized parade in Greenwich Village in New York. People realized actually that a lot of money could be made out of Halloween this way. And so entrepreneurs embarked on a big night Halloween and promoted it very much for young people. And today, millennials in particular are very like this stepping out, clubbing, raves, fancy costumes, and competitions, and things like that became very much the form of the 1990s in particular and on. And if we can get the next slide, which gives here's an advertising for us, the third annual Halloween Madonnathon in New York in 1984. And this has become very typical of Halloween, and it has actually boosted Halloween as a big spending festival in many ways. It's not the only thing that has. Ironically, the Halloween sadism did as well, because what it got people to do was perhaps concentrate not only on trick-or-treating, but to send kids prior to Halloween to various Halloween entertainments, haunted houses, haunted hayrides, seances, spooky seances in libraries and things like that. And Halloween became, in many ways, big business in many ways. And the figures were quite dramatic. When I wrote the book in 2002, it was estimated that the amount of money spent on Halloween was now $6 billion. And last year it was over 12. So it just gives you a sense of how big a holiday it is. And if you walk around your neighborhoods, you see that some people invest considerable amount of money in Halloween with all sorts of holographic effects and decorations outside of their houses and things like this. The other aspect of Halloween was, of course, in the 1970s, the horror genre. If we can just move to that, to the next slide. The horror genre, the Halloween series itself began in 1972. It was still going in 2018. It was still extremely profitable. A lot of people go to it. And Halloween horror is taken for granted these days. In my local cinema just around the corner, which has been revived, the Rogers Hot Doc Cinema, we're going to get the Rocky Horror Show on Halloween. This happens, the Halloween cycle continues. Halloween 11, in which Jamie Lee Curtis made a reprise as Laurie Strode, confronting Michael Myers, the psychopath in Halloween. It drew nearly 260 million worldwide, made a profit of 128 million altogether. This was the film in 2018. And so what has happened to Halloween in many ways is commercialism, some segmentation. We still have trick-or-treating, but it is very much a young people's night. It is a night of high commercialism in some ways. More money is spent on Halloween than any other festival, other than, of course, American Thanksgiving and Christmas. And it has now become a season. It's not really even associated particularly with the 31st of October, but it stretches for a week or so. At Thanksgiving, I was in a big celebration of Thanksgiving, and the teenagers went off to some Halloween haunted house after Halloween. This is what happens. Last weekend, I saw people dressed up all over Toronto going to Halloween celebrations. So in many ways, what has actually made Halloween more uniform and more commercial is this heavy publicization of the holiday, not only horror, but also hilarity, also masking, dressing up. A lot of people now find Halloween a very popular festival to invest their time in. Thank you. I'll give you one more thing, the last one. One of the curious things about Halloween, of course, is that every fourth year, it prefaces the presidential election in the United States. And since, interestingly, 1900, there have been Halloween reference to presidential elections. This is a rather amusing one of Halloween in 2020, in which, interestingly, Donald Trump is dressed up as Hannibal Lecter, which is really ironic because actually there have been references to Hannibal Lecter in some of his speeches. And we await with trepidation the verdict on this next American election. Thanks.
Well, that was really great. Thank you so much, Professor Rogers, for that, of course, very timely presentation with tomorrow being Halloween. I personally love Halloween. I was eager to host this Scholars Hub conversation because it's just one of my favorite days of the year. And we want to thank you so much for your presentation. And so now, for the audience, we will go ahead and open up our questions, and please feel free to use the Q&A question function at the bottom of the screen. And for those of watching on Facebook, you are also able to submit questions that will get fed through to our chat here. And I'm actually just going to start with a nice, easy question for you, Professor Rogers. And I'm curious to know how you came to study Halloween. What was the interest and intrigue that put this on your radar?
Two things, I think. One is I was always interested in popular politics and festivals, so I was interested in festivals generally. And the second thing is, and which I mentioned in my talk, I never celebrated Halloween myself. I celebrated Bonfire Night. And when I came over to North America, I was confronted with Halloween. I thought, what is this holiday? And of course, I took my children on Halloween. So I thought, well, why not do some work on it? So I did over a fairly long period of time. I spent a lot of time in looking in newspapers in different places I went, and picked up on some critical sources like the Folklore Commission in Dublin, where there's 6 volumes on Halloween, actually, of the practices that take place in Ireland, and wrote the book. I thought it would be nice to write a popular book rather than an academic one, and indeed, this book has sold more copies than all my academic books put together.
Well, that's an amazing accolade and so interesting. So a question from we are definitely getting interest and lots of exciting questions in our Q&A. And the first is from an audience member named Larissa, who is asking, what was the Tylenol scare?
Oh, the Tylenol scare was they had to pull Tylenol off the shelves because there were reports of cyanide being put in Tylenol and contaminated pills. So they pulled the whole lot off the shelves very dramatically in 1982. And that just fueled actually anxiety for people about contamination. And it happened just before Halloween.
And so was that kind of factored into when you mentioned the kids who there were some
Yeah,
unfortunate, was there a link
very
between the two
distressing
things?
story of a very demented father who put cyanide in his child's pixie sticks and killed his child for insurance. This happened just before that. It happened in, I can't remember, Ronald Clark O'Brien was his name. And he was eventually executed for it. And that and stories of raisins in the apple and so forth that were proliferating in the press, in the newspapers. Sociologists have looked at this and say that actually a lot of the tales of contamination were highly exaggerated, that they took the form almost of urban legends, but there were enough of them around to make it seem credible.
I can remember being of the age where my candies were all put down and my parents were very thorough because I was a child in the time that you're
Yes. I
referring
think it
to.
put paid to
Yeah.
apples. I mean, there was a time when people would distribute apples, but
Hmm.
nobody would take anything that was not properly wrapped any
Yeah.
longer for fear
Very,
that there might be some poison or something and sharp needles in it.
very interesting. Another question that has come out from another audience member, Leopold, is would you say that zombie walks are a return to the pagan roots of Halloween?
Ooh, zombie walks. I don't know much about zombie walks, really. This is from Night of the Living Dead, I think. I
Hmm.
mean, it has a relationship to Halloween because Night of the Living Dead was one of the first movies that actually became part of the seasonal Halloween. So there is a sort of seasonal association. But beyond that, I don't think there's any uh, real evidence of a link. Yeah.
Okay, great. A fun question is another audience member, Andrew, would like to know what you are dressing up as this
Oh,
year.
this year, no, I'm not dressing up at all. I'm just going to go around with my some of my grandchildren on Halloween. I'm not dressing up. I used to. I used to dress up quite a lot. Members of my department remember I held about 6 or 7 big Halloween parties actually in succession. I even cross-dressed in one of those. But no, not dressing up this year.
Another comment with question from one of our audience, Mike, is first thanking you for your wonderful talk. And his question is, do you think the rise of the evangelical right in the United States will mount a concerted effort to suppress Halloween in this current political climate?
It's a
Or
good
do you
one.
think that Halloween is now too big to fail, given, as you mentioned, the economic value of this
Yeah,
holiday?
it's too big. It's too big. There are going to be what I might call cultural skirmishes, and people and certain areas where they will try to get rid of Halloween um, parties in schools because there are often dressing up parties in schools. And I think some of the Christian right, in trying to say that really Halloween is derivative uh, of Samhain and is pagan and is satanic. It shouldn't be held, and it's also very permissive. And sometimes the Christian right have actually produced alternatives to haunted houses. In Colorado, they even have hell houses where they talk about the dangers of permissive sex and so on. Even people dying of abortion and so on, and so there is attempt to the local level, I think, to get very worked up about Halloween. And there were initially some very big clashes in Castro Street, San Francisco, between the Christian right and the gay community about Halloween. But it's too big. And one of the interesting things about this is, my book finished with this, is 2001. What do you do with Halloween when the World Trade Center's just gone down? Uh, how do you reconcile fake gore with real gore? Should we ban Halloween? Because does it create paranoid perceptions of what's going on? And in fact, the response in America at the time was, let's make Halloween red, white, and blue. And they made it in that year, 2001, in spite of an anthrax scare, actually, as well, a very patriotic festival. In other words, this is our Halloween. We're going to keep it. Of course, it's not just their Halloween. In
Mhm.
many ways, it's celebrated in many other places. But that gives you a sense of the strength of the holiday. And I don't think even if Mr. Trump gets in that there will be any attempt to reform the holiday.
I can say, I have a son in elementary school, and we just got an email that says, please have their costume not be too scary or offensive. But very much ago, like let's keep it up for especially the children.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's echoing, I think, what you're mentioning there.
yeah,
Another part of your talk that I know was really interesting was the link to the scary movie genre. That was
yes.
really interesting. The Halloween movies, as you said, they've continued up until 2 years ago, where now the final Halloween movie has been filmed. And so one of our guests, with that being said, would like to know if you have a favorite scary movie of your own, and what is it?
No, I don't particularly. I mean, I was brought up, in the, today, one of the interesting things about horror movies is with the increasing sophistication of special effects, they are quite actually um, they become to such a point that there's a certain sensitivity level where you just don't pay any attention to it. Actually, I think
Mm,
it isn't frightening any longer because video games and there's so much going on that makes actually a certain kind of horror um, ordinary, almost not
mhm,
extraordinary. So for me, and the first horror movies I saw, the first one that was really scary because it hadn't been done before was Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. That
mm,
was the one that was very spooky. And that was because it was unpredictable. It wasn't in cinematic terms, it wasn't really, it didn't have many special effects, not very much gore. There wasn't much gore, actually. There was just the knife going down in the shower, but it was terrifying.
mhm. So interesting. Another question from someone named Carol in our audience is, where did the monsters come from with the link to Halloween? Vampires, the werewolves, like where did they come
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think vampires. Well, the interesting thing about vampires are fairly late development. One of the interesting things is the first film about, well, the first Dracula film with Bela Lugosi was
from?
not actually staged on Halloween. It was staged on Valentine's Day.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I mean, and so there was no particular link, I think, between vampires and and Halloween. I think that just developed as the genre, as the horror genre developed, and actually. There was a reprise of some of the old Hammer movies, British Hammer movies, which filmed the stories of Edgar Allan Poe and people like that, which I think helped to bring in vampires and things like that. So I think it's very very cinematic, actually.
Mhm. So I guess there are a few comments here. Someone named Karen Dancy just wants to say they used to dress up here in the history department for Halloween. So that sounds like a lot of fun. And another comment was from Heather, who says she grew up in Vancouver and Halloween was the date that there were fireworks on. So that's kind of a big deal.
Yes.
You had never heard about that for another Canadian city. So that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yes, yes. I mean, there are references to fires being held um, in Halloween, in older Halloweens. There is a tradition actually around in the 18th century of what's called leeting the witches, which is you burn fires to ward off witches. And so there is a sort of fire ritual associated with early modern Halloween, but
Mhm.
I've not heard of fireworks in Toronto, I must say.
No, definitely not. Another comment from someone is that they'd like you to know that you could probably do a low effort version of Albert Einstein for a Halloween costume if you needed to come
Yeah,
with something
yeah.
quickly.
I just need to get my hair going a bit more, I think.
And another audience member, Heather, also wants to let you know that she saw the movie Psycho in 1961 and then stayed in a motel. So that would be an interesting
Oh my God, that must be
experience,
terrifying.
that movie put in your mind.
Yes,
But we
yes.
do have another question from coming in from Facebook that I just want to ask about is you mentioned you dictated a little bit the history of Halloween and how it was like a time of frivolity and fun. And
Yes.
then it kind of turned to like this almost potential harm. Like, how would you say that transpired? Like what was the shift
Well, it's
went from
because of the ambiguity of festivals, even early modern festivals. Early modern festivals were times when people congregated together
Mhm,
and and in which there would be hilarity, but there may well be social retributions of various kinds. Initially, because say neighbors were considered niggardly. Neighbors were not, in pre-welfare state societies, neighbors were expected to actually richer neighbors to give things to and to share food and so forth. So there could be reprisals. So
mhm,
I think these reprisals then got a little bit more scary, and they could develop into very antisocial forms of behavior. There were occasions I haven't mentioned this, but there are occasions in New York where there were wilding sprees at Halloween in which people went around attacking the homeless and things like this. So it
mhm,
has its disturbing side.
mhm,
And, all holidays that allow for a certain amount of festive license for getting away with a little bit can also turn nasty, and
mhm,
that's what happens. So I think it's inherent in the ambiguity of festive life, if you like.
mhm. Very interesting. And a final question I think it will end up being is, so of course with the history of Halloween, it is first All Hallows Eve, meant to be before the day before the Day of the Dead. And so just wondering how you think potentially it somehow became viewed as anti-religious because there are certain groups who feel, I do not celebrate Halloween because they see it as
Well,
anti-religious.
it
I'm just
becomes
wondering.
anti-religious because they zone in on the on the pre-Christian origins of the holiday
Mhm.
rather than on the Christian holidays. I mean,
Right.
one of the other things that you came up with Day of the Dead is that there has been a little bit of friction,
Mhm.
and you can find it particularly in the southern parts of the United States, particularly in places like San Antonio in Texas and other places where you have a lot of Mexicans
Mhm.
and Latinos of different kinds who celebrate Day of the Dead, because Day
Mhm.
of the Dead is really the cognate festival to Hallowtide. It's the same, really.
Yes.
I mean, it's gone in different directions. So when Halloween was exported, which it was. I mean, Halloween's now back in Britain, back in England. I mean, and so forth. A rather tacky Halloween actually, but it's still there. But there was a lot of friction. And and Mexicans saw Halloween as a form of a sort of cultural imperialism by the US and trying to take it over. So there has been some negotiation of Halloween in places like Los Angeles, San Antonio, anywhere along the border, New Mexico, where you get actually a blending of the two traditions.
Mhm.
Uh, you get uh, you get the sugared heads of Halloween and of Day of the Dead and some of the candies of Halloween that are mixed of Day of the Dead that are mixed with Halloween. So there's a fusion in some places of the holiday, which I think has been quite which has addressed this problem. But that was an issue in the 1790s initially.
Well, that is so interesting. And I just one more time want to say thank you, Professor Rogers, for joining us today for, this excellently timed day before Halloween talk and very interesting. And to our audience, please feel free to look up Professor Rogers' book that he had mentioned, his many books, 11 books, but his Halloween one his popular book that he mentioned, which would be, I think, probably very interesting to read. And my colleague Jenny has just shared the link to it in our chat as well. So again, thank you so much, Professor Rogers, and you're welcome to turn off your screen
You're
now as
welcome.
we wrap up. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.
And for the audience, we have one more question, and it's how would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following this discussion? And it will pop up on your screen right now. In the meantime, Scholars Hub will be back on November 28th with an in-person session, and we look forward to meeting you there. Actually, sorry, I will correct that. It will be on the 27th and virtual. And to register for this event and learn more about our upcoming sessions and events, please feel free to visit yorku.ca/alumni and friends. Thank you, be well, and happy Halloween to those of you who enjoy the holiday. Take care.